Hey everyone, Pugs here with 2 new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Shanghaied and Gary Takes a Bath. I guess this is technically the second special I've reviewed. I don't know, Shanghaied kinda occupies a liminal space here. I'll explain it later. Let me move on. As always, I just want to extend a quick thank you to everyone who's been watching, liking, commenting. Y'all know I say this every time. Y'all know the drill. And yeah, I guess that's everything I want to say in this little intro, so let's just get right into it. Shanghaied is definitely one of my favorite SpongeBob SquarePants episodes that is longer than 11 minutes. Does that solve the problem of calling it a special? Nah, but seriously, like I was saying, Shanghaied occupies a very liminal space, because during its first airing, it was as long as a special because of the whole gimmick with having people call in to decide the ending. But now it's just a longer episode with some patchy segments, so it's a little odd, but I like it. Shanghaied is simply a hilarious episode with a fun story, and it's also the basis for one of the most iconic SpongeBob YouTube poops of all time, so it deserves 10 points for that alone. And yes, I know, I'm always referencing these things, but that's just what my mind goes to. I don't know what you want me to say about that. Like usual, I'll start off with talking about the patchy segments in this episode, which are great as always. They're very explosive this time around. I thought this episode had a really neat gimmick going on, originally having 3 endings that voters could choose from. They need to bring that back. Honestly, when was the last time this show did anything interactive like that? Was it during the whole color event they did for the premiere of Squid Noir? We need more interactive stunts like that. They're so fun. Anyway, I don't have all that much to say about the patchy segments here, other than I like them, and they continue to prove how great of an addition to the show Patchy and Potty are. And turning things over to the main portion of the episode, I like how this episode begins, with the anchor crashing into SpongeBob's house when he's just trying to eat his cereal. SpongeBob's whole "the sky had a baby" thing is hilarious. And once the gang climbs up the anchor, we get some cool set pieces with the Flying Dutchman's ship. And this sets up a lot of great jokes back to back. Seriously, I think for the moment the Flying Dutchman first appears, or really once the trio gets onto the ship, to maybe the end of the perfume department scene, it's just nonstop hilarity that never gets old. Even though he disappears for half of the episode, Squidward is absolutely excellent here. I love the back and forth he has with the Flying Dutchman that ends with him getting burned, obscene times, kind of like Patrick in Neptune's Spatula. And I also like his fall through the Fly of Despair, which had very cool visuals, as a nice treat for me, I guess. And I love that as soon as he got free of that fly, the poor squid was whisked back onto the boat. This was just a great bit of horrible timing and excellent irony. SpongeBob and Patrick are similarly fantastic in Shanghaied, both in the aforementioned scenes, and even more once they become part of the Flying Dutchman's crew and completely fail to be scary. I love the random ice skating bit that they had. I thought that was just really funny. In this episode, we have one of my favorite scenes, the whole "you're good" bit, as well as the ever iconic "lee-lee-lee-lee." And actually, for a second, can we talk about the sound that SpongeBob made during that scene? What even was that? I don't even know what Tom Kenny was doing, but he was doing it. And SpongeBob and Patrick joining the Flying Dutchman on his nightly haunts is fun as well, filled with an assortment of great jokes of how they mess up his hauntings. I think my favorite of those has to be the part where they run into the metal wall. The voice acting there, along with the painting of them in the metal wall, really sells it. And a bit later in the episode, we have the excellent perfume department scene, which is just so funny. A small little side note here. So I like watching this episode with audio commentary, right? When I watch all the DVDs. And so apparently the people in the background of this scene were just a bunch of Nickelodeon workers at the mall, which I think is a cool detail. It makes sense that they wouldn't record random people, but anyway. The perfume department scene has to be one of my favorites of the episode because it's just dramatic and long enough to be hilarious for an extended period of time without becoming dull. I also find the ending of this episode to be great, if perhaps maybe the weakest part of the whole thing because it's not drop-dead hilarious. But who cares? This episode has been killing us with laughs all the way through. The ending doesn't need to be the best thing ever. Speaking of the ending, I think the funniest one out of the 3 possible ones is probably Squidward's ending, but I enjoy the one we have, so that's fine. I feel like people voted for SpongeBob because he is SpongeBob, and that was always going to happen, even if his was the worst ending. That's just how these things work. And clearly, I really like Shanghaied. It belongs right up in my amazing tier. I have absolutely no problems with it, and it's a fun ride, even though it's a bit longer than usual. It's just so funny. And that's why this episode is going straight into my amazing tier, coming in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. Next up, we have the moment we've all been waiting for, an episode focused on Gary. I'm sure it's very surprising to you all that Gary is my favorite character. And as CEO of Gary the Snail, because that's what I am, of course, the most qualified to talk about this episode. I kid, but in all seriousness, I am excited to cover a Gary-focused episode, even if it's not my favorite episode ever. I love how simple this episode is, and it's perfect for a shorter segment like this. For some reason, the bluntness of the title just makes me chuckle a bit, especially considering that Gary doesn't even end up taking a bath in this episode. But as you can see, I'm easy to please, can't you tell? And even though the premise of this episode is simple and the barest plot points repetitive by default, the episode hardly feels that way at all, which is a good thing. Every new way SpongeBob tries to get Gary to take a bath is equally entertaining to me. My favorite has to be when he puts the bomb on his chest because of the dramatics and the way he's like, please, before exploding. The subliminal messages part is also pretty funny, especially because SpongeBob ends up just apologizing to Gary for what he had seen. And then SpongeBob eventually snapping is pretty funny, and even I feel threatened by his appearance and water shooting skills. Gary is such a clever little snail in this episode, though, tricking SpongeBob and then taking the ladder away. This segment of the episode almost makes SpongeBob feel like a parent, with how he's threatening Gary in the most parent-like tone ever. And the segment ends perfectly with SpongeBob's line about being a dirty boy, and I love that in the end, it's SpongeBob who's forced to take a bath. Even though the whole episode I was rooting for SpongeBob to quote-unquote win, I adore that Gary won the battle here. His little smile at the end is too precious. How can I say no to that? And that's really all I have to say here. This episode, it's a good episode, and like I said, it's a little bit repetitive in its plot points, so it's kind of hard to say much more than what I already did. And it's a pretty good episode, perfectly fitting my great tier. It doesn't really have any outstanding problems, but it is short, and that does hurt it a bit, keeping it from developing a more complex plot, which is not a bad thing. And it also means that jokes don't really sit in this episode, except for maybe the don't drop them joke. That's so bad, oh my god. But yeah, Gary Takes a Bath is a perfectly enjoyable episode, but it's not incredible. And that's why it'll come in my great tier with a score of 8.3 out of 10. As always, just wanted to end with some closing thoughts of mine. And looks like we're a bit on the shorter side today, which makes sense because Shanghaied wasn't a proper special that I could really dig into. And then Gary Takes a Bath, like I said, was a very repetitive episode, but not in a bad way. But that means there wasn't too much to talk about. So it makes sense why this review is a bit shorter. And speaking of Gary Takes a Bath, I think it's at times like these, I feel like I was a little too harsh on these episodes in my original review. Well, Shanghaied, maybe not. Maybe if I were to review Shanghaied now, I'd probably give it a 9.5 out of 10, but that's within my normal range of plus or minus 0.1 or 0.2 at any given time. But for Gary Takes a Bath, that's probably an amazing tier episode. But I stay consistent with my original reviews, which is why it's still a great right now. But yeah, it's a bit harsh back then. I don't know. I was still figuring out my review system, I guess. But we live and we learn. I don't think there's many episodes like this. Like I said, I think it was the last episode that I said this for was Big Pink Loser. So there aren't many episodes that I feel have a completely wrong tier. So we're good. And yeah, I think that's the only thing I really want to say here. So I guess I will end this review now, and I will see you guys next time.